Hello, today I'm going to be going over my Audiowave eye shader. This one has quite a few settings, so I'm going to be doing my best to get through them all, but as you can see, there's quite a lot to get through. As a general rule, if something has like two sets of identical settings that just affect different things, then I'll only cover one of them. But yeah, let's get into it. So starting out, the shader uses Thry locking now. So when you go to upload your avatar, you're going to have to lock in your shader, just like Poyomi or other shaders that use Thry. This is especially important if you plan to animate any of the properties. You'll need to right click and make sure animated when locked is selected, and then you should then lock the shader before animating that property, just to make sure that the properties are properly animated when locked. Okay, let's get into it. So at the top, we'll see we have two rendering presets. This isn't terribly important if you just want like an opaque eye that you aren't going to see through, no transparency or whatever. But if you are looking for a transparent eye, like I support that now, I'll get into the alpha settings later. For now, I'm just going to leave it at opaque, and let's get into it. So to start out, we have lines radial scale, which controls how far these lines go across. So you can see as I increase it, they get smaller. It changes that as a group. So all lines are bound by that. You can see if I go up here, we get bigger lines. Going to 0 is just going to give you completely white, right? Because the lines are scaled infinitely. Personally, I generally use this just for shrinking them. Rather than for growing them, but that may be different for you. Line 1, 2, and 3 are these lines in the center. Line 1 glow color does exactly what you expect, changes its glow color. You've got a hue shift here, exactly as you'd expect. Line 1 glow brightness lets you change how bright the line glows into the negatives if you so choose. Line 1 thickness lets you change how thick the line is. This can be interesting for some effects that I'll get into later. And yeah, that is like those line settings. Now, there is an advanced section. Like always, stuff in the advanced section might have issues with other settings, or they might do like odd things that I still think are cool and like the end user might have a use for, but could also break some stuff. So line parallax, this is one of the only things that, in fact, it's the only thing in the shader and probably the only thing I think I've made so far that the parallax is in the advanced settings. This is because of how the lines get this information. It looks pretty nice, pretty fine when you're dealing with like this, but you can sort of see that something odd is going on. So that's why that's in there. Line UV scale. This is letting you affect the UVs in which the lines are drawn across. So you can see if I make the X tighter, it sort of pulls everything in, makes the X negative, it pulls everything out, right? Same thing with the Y. It can get a little bit crazy if you set it really low. Line minimum value. So before I do like the calculation for the glow, I grab a minimum value that I say anything lower than this becomes this, because you can get 0 and negative values, and the you never want to like divide by 0. It can create really bad stuff, but it can also create some really interesting results depending on how you use it. So in this case, I said before that thickness can have interesting effect. If we go below 0, you can see we get this like negative inverted cool line. You will notice a little bit of aliasing along the edges. That's where it like gets steppy and sort of like not kind of weird. It's not really a directly supported setting, so I didn't worry about that. But yeah, the other thing you can do is slightly increase it to create this like faded glow of the line. But yeah, there's lots of stuff that you can mess with those. Okay, audio link off curve settings. So if you haven't caught on by now, this eye's main thing is that it's audio linked, and these curves are just for when the audio link is off. So these curves are made up of one noise texture with some like sign manipulation, which is like the third line, but the other two lines are just stacked sine waves. So this can let you affect how those curves look. You can see I can make it like really, really light, and maybe this one I make like extreme, right? Or the other way around. Or I could just make them both like barely there, right? So that's for you to play around with. This one affects the other one, and then this one affects that final line. Scale, honestly, I wouldn't play with that much, but it can let you like increase how far they go. Okay, let's get into the pupils settings. So the pupils is a little bit weird of a term to describe it, but I could think of a better term. The pupils are these rings. So the shader supports 3 different pupils, and I'll cover them as like one unit. So pupil 1 enabled. Each of the pupils has just a checkbox to have it enabled or not. I would say that using this checkbox to turn off the pupil will get you more reliable results than trying to like set the brightness to 0, for example. In fact, setting the brightness to 0 can have really unintended consequences because the background takes the brightness of the pupils into account. So, for example, with pupil 2, if I set the brightness to 0, you'll see that the background disappears because it uses that brightness value to determine some of the elements of the background. But if I just turn it off, right, none of that happens. I still do those calculations. So anyway, let's get into it. Glow color, same as before, just changes what color. Hue shift, same as before, just shifts the hue with a slider, which makes it easy to like animate. Pupil size, exactly how you'd think. 0, it's not there. 1, it covers the full eye. Parallax, also exactly what you'd think. This controls how inset the pupil is. Pupil 1 thickness controls the border thickness. Yep. Pupil 1 brightness controls the brightness. Same idea. You can go into the negatives. Pupil 1 offset. So this lets you offset the entire pupil. So if we turn it up, you can see I can literally like move it around, up and down, and that can let you do some really interesting things, especially like putting the rings, for example, in like a different shape. Pupil 1 aspect ratio does exactly what you would sort of think. It changes the aspect ratio of the pupil. This is super helpful for getting like unique pupil shapes, especially with the alternate shapes that we'll get into in a second. So alternate shape selection. This controls which shape the alternate pupil shape is. So heart is exactly what you'd think, a heart. And by turning the alternate shape slider up, you can see that it makes that shape a thing, right? This alternate shape slider works a little bit differently from the one I had on my Cosmic Eye shader, in that you'll notice that it doesn't like blend between the two shapes. Instead, you can still see the old shape just at like 50% brightness. This is so that we can support like adding, having like 2 shapes per pupil, right? So I can do that. Now I've got a heart inside a circle, which I think looks pretty cool. And because they're 50% brightness, you can just double the brightness and it just works, right? Other alternate shapes are the sparkle, which is like a super ellipse, diamond, which is a diamond, and star, which is a star. Like I said before, using like the aspect ratio, you can get unique shapes. For example, I can make like this like cat's eye shape and stuff like that. Let's go back. This is the one unique setting that is different between different pupils. Pupil infill. So only pupil 1 has pupil infill. So if you're planning to use this for like, this should be your center, like the middle pupil, depending on what you're doing. You can see that turning that on and off makes it like cover up the background. It should be noted that this does not like sort anything. So if I were to put like pupil 2 on top of pupil 1 and put it like behind it using parallax, you can see that it still can be seen through it. It just covers up the background. This can allow for some interesting effects, but that's all up to you to mess around with. I didn't think sorting would be particularly efficient, um, given that it is somewhat computationally expensive to sort the layers, and it's not something that I think would be super important for this. Um, Maybe in a future update. Um, Advanced, just like the line settings, we have these pupil minimum values, so I can set like the minimum to negative for the center and then turn up the thickness, and now I've got like this really wacky effect. But yeah, you can play around with that. Okay, we're on to the ring settings. So the rings are these little rings that rotate around. You can see we have a gradient. So the gradient goes from the first, or like the last ring to the first ring. And that is still the case when there are more rings. So in this case, you see number of rings is currently set to 4. If I turn that up, you'll notice that it still follows the same gradient, just over more rings. So yep, like you'd expect, just changes the colors of the gradient. Same with the hue shift. Lets you shift individual size. Ring size sets the size of the individual rings, so this can let you do some really interesting effects. The ring's radial spread controls like how far away from the center they are, so you can play with that. Number of rings controls like the number of rings that are there when audio link is off. That's important because audio link can control the number of rings and stuff like that. Rings parallax just controls like what parallax layer they're on. Rings brightness, exactly what you'd expect, controls their brightness. Rings thickness, just like anything else, you can make them thicker. This is especially cool with like ring size, where you can make dots instead of like rings if you wanted to, for example. But it's all up to you to play around with. Rings rotation speed, increasing this increases how fast they rotate. You'll notice that they do like stepped rotation. Smooth rotation didn't look amazing, so instead I made it so that they step like one ring forward at a time, right? If anyone knows like those NeoPixel rings, similar to that. The debug ring colors is just something that I had for debugging, but I figured someone might find it useful. It just does like from the beginning of the rainbow to the end. One thing to note, this does not follow the typical like gradient settings, so it's like just whatever ring you're on is going to be whatever color you're on. Rings min value, same thing as before, where you can like turn up the thickness, get weird negative colors. Yep. Okay, background settings. So the background settings control the these background like bit, like the bit that's past everything else. So glow color, exactly what you'd expect. Just controls the glow color. Glow hue shift, same thing. Background brightness controls like how bright in the background is. You can make it really negative, make it super bright, right? Background parallax controls like how far or how close the background is. You'll notice if I turn off the pupil infill that it can create sort of like a infinity mirror effect. If I turn up the parallax, but that's something to mess around with. So slices and cores has to do, that's like how I've described each piece here. So you can sort of see that like each piece seems like divided. So that has to do with this, that has to do with the slices and cores values. So you can see each slice is an extra like slice of a pie. And each core is an extra like inset piece. So if I turn it down to like, I don't know, like 4, right? You can see there's 1 core, 3 cores, 5 cores, so on, right? And this can let you make a lot of different cool effects. But there are other options for the background, which I'll get to in a second. Background movement, this is like spin and grow, so you'll notice that it's like slowly shrinking inward. So if I set spin to 0, you can see that it's like going in, turn up that value, it goes in a lot faster. It sort of creates like an optical illusion where it's like hard to tell what's going on at certain speeds. But if we go the other way around, now it's like going out, spin exactly what you'd think, just spins, and negative spins the other way. Background vignette. This controls the like edge of the background. You can see that when I turn it up, it gets harsher, right? And turn it down less. Background parallax vignette controls a vignette that goes like in from the front. So you'll see when I'm looking straight on, like I can see all of it, but as I come around the side, you can see the background fades. That's what that does. Okay, background texture. So this is where things get a little bit interesting. So you don't necessarily have to use the background color. You can also use a texture to give the color. So for example, if I get like the rainbow color, like rainbow texture that comes with Poyomi, right? See, nothing immediately changes. But if I set this to white and turn up the brightness and don't have convert texture to grayscale, I'll get to that in a second. That's why it wasn't working. You can see that now the background is rainbow colored, right? So that's one way to use the texture, right? But another way is with this convert to grayscale option. So I can put in something like a noise texture. Let me just grab a random noise, right? And you'll see that that noise affects that background. So maybe that noise wasn't the best, but I can put in like something like this, right? And that's very clear that you can see that it affects the background. And by using like the grayscale, you can recolor it however you want. So even if like this background or this noise was red, right? It doesn't have to be red. I could make it like blue because I'm just converting it to grayscale. This can also let you use just like a normal eye texture. So for example, if I look for like, let me see if I have one. I might have removed them from my project, which would be unfortunate. Here we go. So this is an eye texture made by Astrofluff, the person that makes the model I use. And you can see that if I leave it convert to grayscale, put it at like white, turn up the brightness, like that's just a normal eye texture. I can turn like down the parallax a little bit, and maybe I don't want like the lines at all, so I can just turn them off, right? And now I've got all the audio link stuff on top of a normal eye. So yeah, that's like one of the things that you can do. Okay, in the advanced section for the background, same like min value as the other stuff can let you create like really smooth effects, for example. This one going negative is like, I'm sure there's a way to make use of it, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. But going up like a little bit clearly has the bigger usage. So let's go back there, and then other things. Dimming strength. So dimming strength has to do with, like I was saying before, the pupils influence the background a little bit. So if I turn up the dimming strength, you're going to notice it like goes extreme. But let's say I put it at like 0.5 and then turn down the brightness a bit. Get it to a good value. Not much has changed, right? But that like sort of has to do with the let's see if I can get this in a good value. It honestly, it's really not something that you'd want to mess with that much. So I'm not going to worry about going more into detail on that. You could mess with it a little bit, but obviously it's going to take changing like your brightness each time. Okay, fractional UV scale. This has to do with these. So you'll notice that like these little lines, right, that make up the background, are sort of weird. Like they look like they exist inside a little box, right? And that's because they do. Each one of these is like the same shape being drawn on like a little UV that goes from like from 0 at the center to 1, -1 on the edges, right? So changing the fractional UV, like this controls how that circle is drawn, because that's what it is. It's a little circle. So with this, you can make like rings, or you can make like lines, like I had it. A combination of the two can let you do like tiny dots or bigger rings or whatever. And using this with like the cores, you can get some pretty cool effects. For example, I'll do like that, turn up the brightness. Now I've got like dots that go around. So yeah, I believe that was it for the advanced settings. Yep. Now the highlight settings. So it's sort of hard to see, but if you look carefully, you'll see there are these little like highlights. I can turn them up, make them like red, so they'll be really obvious. Right. That's just a little bit of extra flare. It just makes things look a little bit more like they're reflecting, like an eye, right? You can change the parallax here, like how far out they come. You can see if you go too far, they gets a little bit wacky. Can change their color. This isn't very well, like, for example, there's no like hue shift slider here because this is mainly designed to be like set up once. Although there are some interesting things that you can do with it that I'll get into a second. Got like a toggle, turn them on or off. Color I covered, parallax I covered. So the offsets, these are like manually set offsets that I put for each dot. So you can see if I like move, if I turn their color to red so they're obvious again and move like highlight one, you can see that you can literally just move it around. This can be useful for doing stuff like with the highlights that they weren't necessarily made to do. For example, if you see in this case, this eye, one of the presets, these dots are the highlights. So if I go down to like the highlights, you can see if I change these, like those are the highlights. So that's one thing that can be done. Also, another thing that should be noted is that this is an HDR color if you want to make them glow. So yeah, you can like offset each of the individual dots on the highlights to do whatever you want. You can change their size, right? You can change how bright they are or not bright. And yeah, the last option is invert highlight X. So you'll notice on like my eyes, right? The UVs go in like slightly different directions. Normally the highlights are you want it to face the same way, right? So it's just a one click and it inverts the X highlight. So if I had another material, I could just uncheck that on that material and then they both face in the same way. So yeah, that's the highlights. Let me go back to the way they were before. Okay, now we get to the real meat. This is the audio link settings. So like I said before, this is all audio linked. So if I hit play mode and turn on my audio link avatar, can start to see. So the way I'd recommend setting this up is starting by setting up everything the way you like it without audio link on, and then turning on audio link, and we can mess with all the other settings. So up at the top we got master audio link control. This just like turns on and off audio link. And this can be useful especially in worlds that like have audio link in them but don't have any audio playing, because you'll notice that if I maybe like turn this off and turn it back on again, like this is what your eyes will look like before like the audio starts up in a world with audio link on. So you might want to like animate this so that you can control it. Invert color chord colors. So you have the option to use color chord colors for any of these colors. We can see it down here. Like I could make the line 1 use theme color 0, and now it's going to change with the music, right? The issue with audio link colors, right, is that they start at completely black, 0. So in a world where like the audio goes from like off to on really fast, like it's beaten to the beat, right, and it's going up and down, right, you might have your eyes like flashing, which is something you probably don't want. So you can just turn on invert audio link colors, or invert color chord colors, sorry, and this will make it go from white to black essentially. So it never will actually really like reach black, right? It's just subtracting the color or 1 minus the color, right? So this can create much better colors in my experience, and it'll be just white when there is no audio. So let's get into the rest of the settings. Audio link or lines audio link control. This just turns off audio link for the lines because there's no other way to do that. And you can see it goes back to this. One thing to note, the color chord colors will continue playing on those lines, right? Because you can easily just turn it off with using set colors here. So yeah, audio link detected lines thickness modifier. So you'll see when I have audio link control off, or audio link off in general, I should say, the lines are sort of like pretty thin, right? If they were that same thickness when audio link is on, you'll notice that they seem like really thin, right? And this has to do with how like stretching the lines deforms them. So this lets you make them slightly thicker when audio link is on. Just as a general rule, like they will always be thicker when you're in a world with audio link. Same thing with the scale modifier. So maybe you want it to be like scaled differently when in a world with audio link. This is what that lets you do. This is especially useful for like, especially the Y value. So yeah. Okay. Lines radial scale audio link. So anything that doesn't have like a detected means that it happens in tune with the music. So if we turn up audio scale, radial scale audio link to like 0.2, right? Or negative 0.2 is probably better. You can see now the radial scale moves with the music. And what band that it moves with is determined below with the setting. So like we can set it to low mids, and now it's gonna bump with the low mids. This is super useful if you have like your lines by default set to like here, and you can see some of the pupils are bumping with the music, but we'll get to that in a second, right? And you want it to like follow that pupil. You can set them both to the same thing, and it'll follow that pupil. So in this case, it might be like 3. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, that's how that works. Thickness. So this works how you'd expect. As the music on that band increases, it gets thicker or thinner. This is adding the value to the existing thickness value. So if I set it to like 0.3, right, you can see that it goes from like normal thickness to normal thickness plus 0.3. If I set it to negative, you can see that it like goes in and out of existence because I'm making the thickness less 0, right? Same thing works with the other two thickness values, right? And yeah. So band, like I explained, lets you set the band for each of these settings. Line 1, 2, and 3 volume scale adjust. I would not recommend messing with this too much. These are sort of values that like I would have left internalized, but I figured it might be helpful to have them out here. So depending on your music, like this looks pretty good here with this type of music, but if I'm listening to like country music, right, it might not be as reactive. So using this lets you like scale how big or small the curves are. So you can see as I increase this, right, this orange curve is getting more and more aggressive. And the minimum value, you can see, sort of does the same thing. The way that this works is like I sample the overall audio and then adjust these values depending on that. So at higher audios, they're going to be a little bit less reactive. That way, you aren't ending up with like curves that go way outside of the circle too often. So this is something you might want to tune depending on your music, but it's probably fine at default for most like upbeat, very very rhythmic songs, like the one that's going on now. Okay, pupils. So this works similar to the radial scale audio link, where you can have the pupils move when like the bass is going off or the low mids or whatever. You can see how that works. That's pretty self-explanatory. You can play with those. Rings. Okay, this gets a little bit more complicated. First of all, we have a toggle. We'll just turn it off, so you can see that's just like default. They will still follow some of these settings that you set, because once again, you can just turn them off. This is mainly for stuff that like can't be affected by that. So, for example, anything that uses like the chronotensity is sort of harder to affect with that. That's why you can just click this to turn it off. So ring base number, when audio link like is on but at 0, this is the number of rings it will show. So you'll see like there's no audio yet, and then we go from 1, which is what I had it set, to a greater value. If you turn these up, you'll see like it starts with these, so these like 4 will always be seen if I set it to 4, regardless of the audio. Sensitivity controls like how sensitive, it like rescales this like a multiplier for the number of rings. So if I set this like 2, you can see it's like much easier to get to the maximum rings. Again, depends on your music. Some music, like most music, this will be fine for, but if you're listening to like really soft music, maybe you want it to be more reactive, turn up sensitivity. Ring spread audio link, same thing as like the radial scale, where you can make them like bump out with the music. Useful for like keeping in track with like a pupil, for example. Okay, rings number increase filter value. I would recommend just keeping this at 3. It's just like how smoothed the increases. So you can see if I set it to 0, like it almost never changes because it's very, very smoothed. So there aren't big like jumps. Leaving it at 3 gives you the best value, in my opinion. Setting it to 2 maybe too for some music, but 3 works for most cases. Okay, ring spread audio link band. This is like exactly what you expect. Just changes the band that they spread on. Ring shake band. Okay, here's where we get like more interesting. You'll notice that the rings like shake. So like right now they're not doing it, but then all of a sudden they'll shake, right? So this is the band that sets that. So when the bass is going, like they're gonna shake. And when the bass is not going, they're not gonna shake. Spin forward band. Basically, there are 2 chronotensity values that are fighting here. One that tries to spin the rings forward, one that tries to spin the rings back. And this depends on like your mode, but and I'm going to change that to backward band probably. I just found a typo. So for example, in this case, I have it spinning forward on low mid and spinning backward on bass. And you can see that my mode, same as Poyomi's mode, like motion increases as the intensity of the band increases. So this is going to try to go forward harder when the band is higher, right? So you could change that to like moves back and forth as a function of intensity, right? Which would make it so that when the intensity is low, it's trying to move backwards. Intensity is high, it's trying to move forward, right? So they don't exactly match up with their names, but generally they do. Ring spin forward mode. Or sorry, this was the shake mode. So for this, I was talking about spin forward mode. This is this but smooth, and this one is this one. So they're like fighting each other, low, mid, and bass, to go back and forth. You can see if I set this to like, if I set them both to bass, and set them both to that, they're like not going to move because they're directly canceling each other out, right? They'll still shake, but they won't like physically move in location. Let me undo that so that they move again. And yeah, that's rings. Background. So you'll notice as the music goes that the number of cores and the number of slices is increasing. Or in this case, actually, it doesn't cores and numbers, it's the spin, but we'll get to that in a second. So if I set spin to 0, you'll see audio link doesn't affect that at all. Let's wait for the music to pick back up. So we can have the vignette affected by audio link. So you'll see like the vignette goes in and out depending on the bass in this case. We can also have the number of slices be affected by audio links. So this is on top of the existing number of slices. So this is like adding slices depending on the bass. Same thing with cores, right? We can add the number of cores depending on the bass. This can create some really cool effects. We can increase the grow value depending on the bass. So right now there isn't a ton, but we'll see in a second. Right, so this makes grow become like 1.4.14 plus whatever grow is already 0.9, or sorry, 0.1 when the bass is going. And once again, like all these can be changed, so you can make it grow on treble, for example. Spin, same thing, make it spin when on bass. You can also go like obviously like negative, which can create a really cool effect. And just like before, all these are changeable. Okay, colors. So colors, I think I showed before, we got each of the theme colors, which is like some worlds set theme colors. You can see if I go here, like these are the theme colors that are set in this audio link. And some worlds have that set up. Obviously, it depends on like what event you're going to. Maybe that might have them set up. Might be worth looking into that. So that's like use theme color 0. It'll take like the 0 theme color to influence the color of the line, right? There are also color chord colors. These are taken raw from color chord, which is like audio link interpreting the color of the music. kind of wacky to say, right? These won't be impacted by the theme colors at all. And then use set colors, which just uses the colors that you already have. This can look like really cool to have a ton of colors like blinking in and out, or it can look like really bad depending on your tastes. So it's up to you. Okay, we're done with the audio link settings, and now we're on to the miscellaneous settings. So I'm going to leave play mode, and let's go over this. So voice animate for reaction. The way this works is it's like used for when you have audio link off. You can see that it grows those curves, right? You can see it does get a little bit like thin, but you can change that with the thickness modifier. But the whole idea is that you're going to want to animate this value with the voice parameter that VRChat gives you. So if you want to know how to do that, I might make a tutorial for it, or there are a ton of tutorials that go over how to make like voice effects in VRChat. But you can just animate this value, so as you talk, it'll make it so that like these go up and down as you talk. Voice multiplier just makes it so that like you can see when it's at 100, like that's what it looks like. If I set it to 2 now, you can see that it gets stronger. So for example, I talk pretty softly. So I set mine to 3, right? And I normally am never going to actually get to 100. I'll maybe get to like here, like 40% of my volume. Base voice value is like, if I set this to 0, you can see it's like nothing. This just controls like the bass stretch, right? If you're not gonna animate it, just leave it at 50. Controls stuff elsewhere. Okay, UV offset. These are the entire eye's UVs. So I've had cases where like someone has set up the UV wrong, maybe, or like they have eyes that already have like pretty square UVs, but maybe like it's offset by 50, right? And they just want to use the shaders. So this lets you do that. You can literally move around the actual UVs. If I grab a quad, let's see, I believe this quad is circular. It's a liar, it's not a quad. That's for another project. This quad will be, nope, it's the other one. Just add a new one, might as well. Oop. Let's reset that, rotate it, move it over here. We're going to use the quad in a bit anyway, so set this from -190, write that on. So this does like literally just like offsets where the center is, right? Can change like the aspect ratio of the full pupil in both directions. And then UV rotation lets you like rotate, right? Exactly how you'd expect. Angle flatten. Okay, so this has to do with the parallax. So on my previous shaders, you'll notice that at an angle, the parallax sort of breaks a bit. It doesn't look amazing. With this one, I wanted to fix that. Like that was one of the main goals of what I wanted to fix. So how I'm doing that is by flattening the parallax as you get to the side. You can see it still looks pretty 3D. You can see like in here that like you can tell it has depth. But as you get towards the side, right, it flattens out a bit. And if if I set this to 1, you can see it doesn't do that. You could also, like, depending on what you want to do, you can use this for other uses. For example, make it, like, I don't know, negative as you get around the side. Like, that's just, like, trippy, right? But I don't know, it's up to you. Personally, the 0 to flatten the side is what I'll be using, but you can also set it to 1 to have it, like, break, like the old one did. This is something I'll probably be adding to all my shaders at some point, but we'll see when I get around to it. Surface vignette. This is just like a vignette that applies. It goes from 0 to 1 out from the center, but it also can go like past 1 depending on your settings. You can see like in the corners. So I honestly just like set it to 10, and if you want to use this, just use it 0 to 1. And 10, like, it's not affecting anything. Bloom. Okay, so if we're in a world with bloom, so let me turn on bloom, turn on post-processing, double check that it's turning on, there we go. So the bloom slider can let you apply bloom without having to have like HDR colors here. So you'll see as I turn up the bloom slider, it gets brighter, right? Obviously it's going to wash stuff out a little bit. So that's like sort of something that you accept if you're going to use bloom. Color divisor. So this can let you get a little bit more depth from the colors. It's like can make it a little bit more gradient. And this can let you get like better bloom with more accurate colors. Another thing I should touch on because it's happening here. You'll notice this like the lightning line looks a little bit blocky, line 3. That's just because of how Unity handles like the time variable. You'll notice like in the game view and in game, like you won't see that, so it isn't too big a deal. It's nothing I can really do to fix that easily without compromising the effect, like how it looks. So yeah, color divisor can let you get like deeper colors while still having bloom. You'll have to like play with those to get settings that you like. Okay, gamma correction. This is like something I added in to like see if it would look nice, and figured I might as well leave the option in there. It's just a different way of like how our eyes see color. So I don't know. Some colors it looks good with, some it doesn't. You can see in this case it like just looks like it adds white to everything, which is sort of what it does. But like, yeah, mess with it. See if you can find a look that you like. Okay, billboard mode. This is something new, and I wanted to some extent get away from like everything being an eye shader. So this is one of the things that can let you like make it an accessory instead of a shader. And we'll see on my avatar, which actually this is the wrong avatar, but hopefully it works the same. The way billboard mode works is it makes the plane face the camera. So you'll see that if I turn on billboard mode on this, right? Now the plane will always face the camera. So just with one quad, you can have like an accessory that floats over you that does like the cool audio link stuff, right? That's what I'm using it for. Or something like that. Or maybe you can put it like on a watch, right? It pops up out of a watch and you've got like cool audio link stuff. Sky's the limit, pretty much. So yeah, now let's get, we're gonna skip the fallback texture for now, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Just whatever texture you put in here is what people will see when they have your shaders off. Okay, now into alpha options. So if you have transparent on, it'll look more like a circle. This is because these default settings make it a circle. So opaque ring is like a direct cutoff, right? So this is like the edge of what will be opaque, and anything inside that will be opaque, anything outside will be transparent, right? Edge gradient, this lets you add an extra like soft edge from that point. So for example, in this case, you can see it's like not really harsh. If I set it to 0, you can very clearly see that edge. It looks kind of harsh. But if I turn up the edge gradient a little bit, then it gets soft. If you go negative, like bad stuff happens. Don't go negative unless you like want to go negative, in which case go negative. I don't know. Up to you. So personally, like I've been putting it on like 0.95, right? And then turning up the edge gradient a little bit to get the effect that I want. Also shrinking the aspect ratio. So if I go to like 1.1, 1.1, right? you can see that I have like more room to work with, so I can make the edge gradient a little bit bigger without it getting directly cut off by the edge, because that is kind of obvious when it's cut off by the edge. So something to play with. Alpha multiplier, like this is just multiplying the alpha, so if you make it like less than 1, then it can be see-through. And 1 is just everything inside the circle is opaque. Pupil 3, audio link movement. This has to do with audio link. If you animate Pupil 3, like it might not look amazing to have it. Let's turn on audio link. It's easier to see than. So if I turn it off, you'll see as Pupil 3 moves, if I make Pupil 3, oops. If I make Pupil 3 like come in, right? That doesn't look particularly good. It leaves behind like this ugly edge, right? And I guess it could be good depending on what you're trying to do. But you can also turn on this setting to make it move the opaque ring with Pupil 3, which can let you make it like bounce out, and that works on like the eyes too. If we look, right? Ooh, we just lost our our base, so let's give it a second to pick back up again. You can see like my eyes physically shrink with the music, right? So yeah, that's one thing you can do. Maybe not to that extent, but totally up to you. Okay, let's turn that off again. So then we get to like the advanced settings. These are just like, this essentially sets a preset of these settings. So if we're on opaque, you can see we've got like z test less equal, z rate on, add 1 0, right? And if we turn it to transparent, we have now z test less equal, z rate off, so it's not gonna write to the depth buffer. Add source alpha 1 minus source alpha, which lets us create like transparency. So that's all that is. If you want to mess with it, like you can do some stuff like 1-1 will create like additive effects where anything seen behind has like the color added, but that's something that you can play around with yourself. Finally, stencil. Just like anything else with stencils, I recommend watching the great Poyomi tutorial on stencils. This can let you like draw your eyes above your hair, stuff like that. I don't have it set up on this model, but it's pretty cool. You should check that out. And yeah, that covers pretty much everything. All my socials are at the bottom. You can set like the shader that you want to be used when people have your shaders off, and other than that, that was it. So I bet this is probably a pretty long video. I will also be making written documentation if you'd like to just go through and read. But yeah, that about covers it. Thank you for watching. See ya.